The human mind isn't terribly logical or a consistent place. Most people, given the chance to face a hideous or terrifying truth, or conveniently avoid it, choose the convenience and peace of normality. That doesn't make them strong or weak people, or good or bad people. It just makes them people. Jim Butcher. Hi, I'm Jessica Disborough, licensed social worker and founder of Higher Consciousness Healing, an innovative mental health practice in Lakewood, Colorado. For more information about our practice, please visit us on the web at www.higherconsciousnesshealing.org. Right now you're watching our live video blog. We air every Saturday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, where we talk about different mental health topics from a spiritual and scientific perspective. So welcome to the show. I really appreciate you joining me this morning. Just a reminder, Facebook Live isn't that live, so feel free to ask questions, make a comment during the show, and I'll try and get to those as best I can. Last week, we talked about 5 ego defenses that we have unconsciously. We talked about Anna Freud being the creator of those, not creator, but she conceptualized the terms. Well, today we're going to go and talk about 5 more that other people have added since she made her contribution. So this is Unconscious Ego Defenses Part 2. And the book that I'm going to be referencing, same as last week, it's Ego Psychology and Social Work Practice by Ida Goldstein. Just a quick review for those of you who are just tuning in. So what do we mean by ego and what do we mean by defenses? Like, let's flesh that out for a minute. So ego, this is kind of my summary definition that I feel like fits a lot of different definitions that other people have done, like Freud or Eckhart Tolle, that kind of thing. So ego is the self we think we are, basically, in a nutshell. And our defenses are unconscious reactions to avoid anxiety and conflicts internally. So they happen on an unconscious level as a way to protect ourselves. And it's just kind of part of the brain and what's happening with everybody. So it's really important for us to dive in and understand these concepts so we can build our self-awareness. So I'm going to cover 5 today. The first one is, let's see if I can say it without tripping over myself, intellectualization. So it's when we think about those emotions and feelings and we talk about them, but we don't actually feel them or express them in a healthy way. Instead, we're like all up in our head, trying to make sense of like, okay, this thing happened and, I really made me upset, but then I'm kind of disconnected from that feeling, even as I'm resharing it. And now this happens a lot when people go to therapy, is they'll be on the couch or chair or whatnot, and the therapist will be asking them, about their past history and about their trauma, and there's kind of a disconnect happening because the person doesn't ultimately feel safe to be with those emotions and to properly express them through means of, not intellectualizing, basically. Because we can spend all day thinking about these different things, but we really have to feel and experience them to really integrate them and have them be part of our world. So, number 2, rationalization. So it's using convincing reasons to justify certain ideas, feelings, or actions to avoid their true nature. Because whatever is going on internally, they feel like it's not acceptable. And so they rationalize it. They use a different excuse than what's actually going on for them internally. What's an example of that? Let's say there's a mom who's in poverty and she rationalizes the purchase of a big screen TV by saying it's important to her family, like her children, like they watch educational programs or whatever the justification is. They want to spend quality time around the television, whatnot. But really what's going on is she feels guilty spending money on something that she wants and can't really afford. So she uses the kids in the family as a way to rationalize her behavior. And we do this a lot, in all sorts of ways, because we don't want to really own up to what we want, what we feel, and what our truth is. And we kind of like mask it and use other things as excuses to rationalize our behavior. So, not ideal. Number 3 is a very common one, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is denial. And that's a non-acceptance or negation of important aspects of reality or of one's own experience. And a really common example is when someone denies that there's something wrong at all. They're like, I'm fine, like there's nothing wrong with me, and we all do this to different degrees. And it can be really problematic, because there's like a straight up, like really, really extreme denial that sometimes happens when someone passes on. There's that instant of, no, this can't be possibly happening. This doesn't make sense. Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe that was somebody else. And you really, really deny that that's even possible until you can kind of like accept it into your reality and be like, okay, this is what's happening. And that's a really extreme example. And then there's smaller examples that happen all the time. So again, really, really normal to deny things and try and like cover them up and be like, that's not really happening, but it's not helpful. Really not helpful in the long run. So if you can catch yourself doing it, that's the best. If you can help other people reality test for you, be like, so I think this is what's going on, but can you tell me like what, is my perception of what's happening, does that seem accurate to you? That could be helpful. Number 4, compensation. You try to make up for deficits by doing something else. So sometimes we call it overcompensation, like that person's overcompensating for something. And a really easy example, and I'm sorry for the men in the audience, but I'll follow up with something that women do a lot, is men may buy like really big trucks or like fancy sports cars because they feel like they're not good enough. They're not masculine enough. They need something that's really extreme to kind of show that, no, this is really who I am. And really like, it's just not a coping mechanism, but a defense mechanism. So women do the same thing with their bras. They don't feel like feminine enough. So they, try and fit the status quo and, buy padded bras and things like that. So those are just to give you some examples. We feel like we have some sort of deficit and then we try and cover up for that. When really accepting our beautiful selves exactly as we are and not having to prove it to anybody is really the way to go. All right, and number 5, and this is definitely a more complicated one, and you might see this a little less with your average adult, but I think it's really important to bring up, but it's called splitting. And basically what's happening with splitting is it's to keep 2 parts that are like wrapped up in our consciousness, but they're contradictory states. And I know it sounds confusing, such as love and hate. So for instance, you might be in a relationship and the guy might bring you some flowers and chocolate and you're like, oh my God, I love you so much. You're like the best. You're so good. You're all good is really what's going on. Like, and the person doesn't remember or acknowledge maybe times when they didn't do something so right. You know, they're caught up in the moment and they're like, you're all good. I love you so much. Kind of idealizing them. And let's say they forget about them to be picked up on a date. And the dude's like, oh, sorry, I was sleeping. I was really tired after work and I slept. Sorry. Forgot to pick you up, didn't wake up till the next day. And the woman's like, oh my gosh, I hate you. You're horrible. You never do anything right. And then suddenly it went from like, you don't remember that he brought you flowers and chocolate, but you're just focused on all the ways that this person's all bad. So it's really a globalization of what's going on in the moment to the extreme. And you might see this with kids because they don't have a good conceptual model of like the gray area and being able to say that things are way more complicated than black and white. And there's actually all of these nuanced experiences and things going on. So, happens. I think it's really important to talk about. So are all of these different ego defenses, because they wreak havoc in our lives, and if we can be more aware of them and more aware of it in each other and communicate that in a like loving way, it'll get better for everybody. So, I didn't see any questions or comments. I did see some like faces and hearts and stuff going up, but if you do have any other questions before we wrap up today's show, it was a little bit of a shorter episode, but I feel like that's fine in our like media saturated culture where we just barely have time to even think. I don't want to make things too long or complicated. So next week we're going to be talking about ego mind traps. So I'm going to be putting together some really common ego mind traps, and what I mean by that is when you get really stuck in your head and kind of like obsessing over something. So there's a couple really easy ones that are helpful to understand and know, so we don't get like trapped in our ego mind basically and like kind of drive ourselves crazy when we don't need to be doing that, and we could just be like, that's an ego trap. Don't go down there. So, all right. I don't see any, as someone said, I really like this explanation. Awesome. I hope it's helpful, because really it's all about building self-awareness, you know, taking radical responsibility to create these changes in our lives and for ourselves, and it improves us and our relationships and ultimately like our communities and the world at large. So that's the goal. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and take care.